Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. The NFL's television policies can be somewhat weird at times, and this was especially true back in the 1980s. You had somewhat complicated single-header and double-header rules that you had to worry about. You had blue laws that forced some teams to not even be able to play at 1 o'clock, and forced them to start at a weird 2 o'clock time. You had blackout policies that forced networks to quickly make audibles depending on how ticket sales were going for that game in the home market. And sometimes, disputes involving these complex rules as to what each network can air on Sunday can get extremely ugly. And in 1983, we might have had one of the ugliest ones of these yet. It's the middle of October in 1983, and down in Florida, rival networks CBS and NBC were going at it hard. Because of a combination of just about everything I said earlier, as well as a major counter program that was going to drastically put a dent in the league's television ratings, the two networks were bickering, not only privately, but publicly, with a dispute that was pretty nasty that played out in the papers. And things got so ugly that the NFL themselves had to get involved and tell the networks to cut it out and to switch up what they were doing, with the NFL essentially forcing the hands of one of the networks. And this is the story behind the bitter drama and the incredible broadcasting controversy between the two networks. Before I talk about the controversy between the two networks, we need some context to understand why something like this was even possible in the first place, and what led CBS and NBC to feud against each other. Our story involves the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and oddly enough, this is not the first time I've done a video where the Buccaneers were involved in the center of a giant broadcasting controversy, as I did a video about how networks were furious when the Bucs got back-to-back nationally televised games in 1991, despite being absolutely terrible. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And entering the 1983 season, there were some expectations for the Bucs. The team had made the playoffs in 3 of the past 4 seasons, and each of the past 2 seasons, making it in 1982 with a 5-4 record during the abbreviated strike-shortened season. However, in 1983, the Buccaneers were absolutely terrible, and that's putting it mildly. Any hope that Bucs fans had going into the season was completely squashed by the end of September. Through their first 6 weeks, the Buccaneers had yet to win a game, starting with an 0-6 record, with their most recent loss being an overtime heartbreaker against the Dallas Cowboys, where the Bucs choked away a late fourth quarter lead and then committed a costly penalty in overtime that allowed the Cowboys to win it on a game-winning field goal. They had the second worst point differential in football at -71, and they had easily what was the worst offense in football at 81 points scored, as they were the only team in the NFC through 6 weeks that had yet to score 100 points. And unsurprisingly, when you have a team that's looking like trash, getting fans to come to the game is going to be tough. Attendance declined in every single game at Tampa Stadium over the first 3 weeks, going from 62,154 fans in the season opener against the Detroit Lions to 57,567 fans in Week 3 against the Minnesota Vikings to 56,023 fans in Week 4 against the Cincinnati Bengals. And now you had a Bucs team that was all but eliminated from playoff contention, and they were going up against an abysmal St. Louis Cardinals team that was 1-5. Good luck selling tickets for that. Their Week 7 game against St. Louis was nowhere close to selling out, as even though the stadium held just under 73,000 spectators, only 48,224 fans showed up and walked through the turnstiles. This meant that, per the NFL policy at the time, the game was blacked out in the Tampa market. CBS could not show the Buccaneers-Cardinals game since it was not a sellout. Little did the NFL know that because of the Bucs being really bad, a massive controversy between the two networks was set to unfold right before our very eyes. To understand how this controversy unfolded, we need to understand how the TV policies worked back then, because without it, the entire situation just seems confusing and makes no sense. In 1983, there were 2 networks that televised NFL games on Sundays. You had NBC, which had the rights to the AFC, and CBS, which had the rights to the NFC. Over the course of a 16-week season, each network would be designated as a doubleheader network 8 times, for an even 50-50 split. What this meant was that if your network was the doubleheader network, you would get a show an early game and a late game. For the purposes of our story, since we're dealing with Florida, we'll use the Eastern time zone, and say that the network got a 1 o'clock game and a 4 o'clock game. If you weren't the doubleheader network, you got just 1 game. That's pretty much how it is today, barring Week 1 and Week 18, when both networks get the doubleheader. So far, so good. However, there were 4 key stipulations to this. Number 1, you had to air the team in your market. There was no getting around that, unless the game got blacked out. If the Buccaneers were playing on the road, or the Buccaneers game somehow sold out, then CBS would have been contractually obligated to show it. If the Bucs did not sell out, then they had free reign and could show whatever they wanted to, minus the Bucs game. Number 2, doubleheader rules did not apply in markets with an NFL team playing at home. So no matter what, if you lived in Tampa Bay and the Bucs had a home game, you would never get the doubleheader, even if the game was sold out. In weeks where the Buccaneers were on the road or were playing on a different night, the Tampa market would get 3 games. But in weeks like Week 7, Tampa would only get 2 games, with one coming from CBS and one coming from NBC. Number 3, even if the designated doubleheader network could not air a doubleheader because of the previous stipulation, they had the first pick as to what game they wanted to air should the designated home team be blacked out. Again, if the Bucs game was sold out, then even if CBS had the doubleheader designation, CBS had to show the Bucs as their only game. But if the game was not sold out, as was the case here, then CBS could pick any game that they wanted to air that they had the rights to. In other words, if there was a marquee game in the NFC that the CBS affiliate in Tampa wanted to air, they could have. And number 4, NFL rules require that a game is taking place at all times. This meant that from 1 o'clock to 7 o'clock, you are guaranteed to be watching at least one NFL game if you wanted to. In other words, CBS and NBC could not both air a game at 1 o'clock and show non-football programming at 4 o'clock. One network had to air a game at 1 o'clock, and one network had to air a game at 4 o'clock. In a situation like the one we saw in Week 7 of the 1983 season, where CBS has a doubleheader designation and therefore gets the first pick even though they can't air a doubleheader, CBS gets to pick whether they want to air the 1 o'clock game or the 4 o'clock game. And then NBC must comply and air a game in the other time slot. And this week, CBS made a move that infuriated NBC executives, as well as tons of football fans around the state. As we all know when it comes to TV ratings today, the NFL is king. For the most part, you can air anything else against the NFL, and the dent it will make in the ratings will be close to insignificant. But back in 1983, while the NFL was the most popular sporting league in the country, and while the NFL was big, there was one bit of counter-programming that the league had to worry about. And that was this little thing called the World Series. On October 16, 1983, Game 5 of the World Series between the Baltimore Orioles and the Philadelphia Phillies was set to take place. And unlike today, where every World Series game gets a primetime start, back in 1983, the weekend games took place during the afternoon. This meant that Game 5 at Veterans Stadium was going to take place at 5 o'clock Eastern. Now, this already posed a conflict for the NFL, as the Eagles were set to play the Cowboys at the same time at Veterans Stadium. That got resolved pretty easily, since the Cowboys and Eagles were in the same division, played each other twice, and hadn't played each other yet. The Cowboys and Eagles just flip-flop home dates, with the game originally scheduled in Philadelphia on October 16th, now set to take place on November 6th. And with the game originally scheduled in Dallas on November 6th, now set to take place on October 16th. Again, that was relatively painless. But from a TV perspective, it created a messy drama. Because as you can probably expect, neither network wanted to compete against ABC with the World Series, especially since, as we would later find out, this was a potential series-clinching game, with the Orioles holding a 3-1 lead. Again, today, the NFL doesn't even have a problem going up against baseball. Barring a sweep, Sunday Night Football will go up against one World Series game every year, and Sunday Night Football dominates. In 2021, for example, a Sunday Night Football game between the Dallas Cowboys and Minnesota Vikings that saw Cooper Rush start at quarterback drew more viewers than Game 5, a potential series-clinching game of the World Series, which featured the Atlanta Braves, a team with arguably one of the top 5 largest fan bases in baseball that was on the verge of winning their first title since 1995, and just their second title since moving to Atlanta back in 1966. But back in 1983, this was a major problem. No network wanted to go up against the World Series. It was rating suicide. Because of this, CBS made the decision that infuriated NBC so much that NBC protested to the NFL. CBS was set to give NBC the short end of the stick. Now, you might be asking yourself why this was a big deal. Someone had to go up against the World Series, and it made sense that CBS was going to opt to air a 1 o'clock game and force NBC to the later window. Well, that's because the most popular team in Tampa Bay at the time was not the Buccaneers. Rather, the most popular team was the other team in the state, with that being the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins had built up quite the fan base over the past decade and a half after making 4 Super Bowls and winning 2, after making it to Super Bowl 17 the year before, and after drafting Pitt quarterback Dan Marino and having him take the starting job. They had a critical game against the New York Jets in Week 7, in what was not only a battle between 2 teams well within the playoff picture at 3-3, and not only a battle between 2 Super Bowl favorites, but a battle between the 2 teams in last year's AFC Championship. This was the first time that the 2 teams were meeting after that game, and especially after the whole controversy revolving around the field conditions at the Orange Bowl on that day, tensions between the AFC East rivals were at an all-time high. There was a large contingency of fans in Tampa that supported the Dolphins, and they thought that because the Buccaneers were getting blacked out, that the Dolphins-Jets game would be airing at 1 o'clock on NBC, and then at 4 o'clock on CBS, you would get a big NFC East game between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys. But nope. Instead, because CBS decided to take the 1 o'clock spot, they screwed all the Dolphins fans in the area, and were set to show the San Francisco 49ers taking on the New Orleans Saints at 1 o'clock, while NBC would be stuck not only competing against the World Series, but would be stuck airing the game between the Los Angeles Raiders and the Seattle Seahawks. As one CBS spokesman said, "We want to avoid going up against the World Series in as many cities as possible. And we have that right this week, because an NFL game doesn't stand a chance against the World Series." Naturally, NBC was furious about this. It wasn't so much that they were going to be drawing the short end of the stick in the Tampa market, because again, CBS had the right to do that. It was the fact that CBS was deliberately picking a worse slate of games and screwing Dolphins fans out of watching their team play, while at the same time, probably not having to take any of the heat, since if the average NFL fan was upset about NBC not showing the Dolphins, they wouldn't know the intricacies of the NFL's TV policy and call up CBS. Instead, they would complain to NBC. As Doug Duperrault, the program director for the NBC station in Tampa, said on the move, "We are very disappointed that we can't carry this important Dolphins-Jets game. It was strictly a CBS decision, one that we have to live with." However, that's not the end of our story. Because after the feud got so ugly that the NFL had to step in and get involved, let's just say that NBC didn't have to live with the decision for long. NBC was so upset about this decision that they filed an appeal with the NFL, asking the league to force CBS to relent on their plan. NBC cited a few things in their report. Number one, NBC had played nice with CBS before, as in weeks where NBC had the doubleheader rights, but CBS had the US Open, NBC decided to show games at 4 o'clock and allow CBS to show games at 1 o'clock before showing the Open later. Even though NBC could have shown games at 1 o'clock and could have forced CBS to air games at 4 o'clock and not show the Open in certain markets. Number two, this move was not being made in the best interests of the football community. The ratings on the whole down in Florida for a 2-game slate where the Dolphins and Jets are playing at 1 o'clock and the Eagles and Cowboys are playing at 4 o'clock are going to be significantly higher than the ratings for a 49ers Saints game at 1 o'clock and a Raiders Seahawks game at 4 o'clock. And the appeal that NBC made was so successful that in essence, they forced CBS's hand and told the network, "You can't do that." There are two conflicting sources here, although they both led to the same result. One source said that the NFL is allowed to exercise its rights in certain situations, and they forced the issue with a direct order. Another source said that it wasn't quite as ugly, that the NFL politely asked CBS if they would change their minds, to which CBS agreed. Either way, Floridian fans were happy. They would be able to see their Dolphins at 1 o'clock as they beat up on the New York Jets 32-14, and then got to watch the Eagles-Cowboys game at 4 o'clock, which the Cowboys won 37-7. And for those wondering, the Bucs would lose their game 34-27 to the Cardinals to drop to 0-7, which no one in the Tampa market saw on TV. I guess everything worked out in the end, even if the road that the parties took to get there was incredibly ugly. Fortunately, a situation like this cannot happen again, since blackout rules no longer exist, since each market will typically air 3 games every Sunday instead of 2, and since the World Series will never take place on a Sunday afternoon again and dare compete against the NFL. But if you were an NFL fan in Tampa in mid-October of 1983, things were looking pretty ugly. What's the moral of this story? When the NFL has to deal with a controversy involving the possibility of the TV ratings being bad, you can bet your bottom dollar that they'll step in and do everything in their power to resolve the situation, even if it means aggressively forcing one of their networks to do something that they don't want to do. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. If you want to see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.